public session. Thank you. With no apologies, I would like to advise members of the constitutional requirement that members must be physically present within the confines of the Leinster House complex in order to participate in public meetings. Like the housing market in general, the residential rental sector is facing significant issues and challenges for both tenants and landlords. And the greatest single challenge is the lack of supply, which is in turn driving up rents. Other issues facing the sector include security of tenure, tenancy terminations, changes to no-fault evictions, the operation and reform of rent pressure zones, reset of market rents, and changes around the sale of rental properties by landlords. Today, I'm pleased we have the opportunity to consider this and other related matters with representatives from Threshold, Institute of Professional Auctioneers and Valuers, and Irish Property Owners Association. From Threshold, I'd like to welcome Mr. John Mark McCafferty, CEO, and Ms. Anne Marie O'Reilly, National Advocacy Manager. From IPOA, Pat Davitt, CEO, and Fintan McGill, President. And from the IPOA, I'd like to welcome Mary Conway, Chairperson, Maurice Deverell, Spokesperson and Committee Member, and Ms. Margaret McCormack, Information Officer. Before we start, I wish to explain some limitations to parliamentary privilege and the practice of the Houses as regards reference you may make to another person in your evidence. The evidence of witnesses physically present or who give evidence from within the parliamentary precincts is protected pursuant to both the Constitution and statute by absolute privilege. Witnesses are again reminded of the long-standing parliamentary practice that you should not criticise or make charges against any person or entity by name or in such a way as to make him or it identifiable or otherwise engage in speech that might be regarded as damaging to the good name of the person or entity. Therefore, if your statements are potentially defamatory in relation to an identifiable person or entity, you will be directed to discontinue your remarks. It's imperative that you comply with any such direction. The opening statements have been circulated to members. We have a very tight time frame for our meeting today, and I want the opportunity for members to get questions and make points. So we might take the opening statements as read, and can we agree that we would publish the opening statements? Is that agreed? Agreed. And now go to the members. I'd ask members to please direct your question to who you want to answer from, and also that you're going to have a time limit, and that time limit is for asking questions and getting answers. As I say, we have an hour and 15 minutes, so maybe straight to the questions. All right. First question slot is the Fianna Fáil slot, and it's Deputy Seamus McGrath. You have 4 minutes.
Okay. Thanks very much, Cahir. Look, and thank you to all our witnesses for coming in to us today. I'll go straight to it, I suppose, because time is ticking somewhere and limited. If I can start with Threshold, I suppose. I have read the opening statements and tried to prepare as best I can. Just, I suppose, the Threshold, again, thank you for being with us. I suppose in your opening statement you give the statistic there of 3,000 renters have come to you with notices to quit in the first 6 months of this year. Can you just give us an idea of where that stands in terms of trends? Is that up on the previous year, for example? Just give us an idea of where we are in terms of presentations on notice to quit, if you could, please.
I can take that.
Yeah.
Sure. So, as regards to tenancy terminations, we did see a bit of a spike in early 2023, but this is the number that we're seeing right now has been fairly consistent since about 2022. So there's slight variations quarter on quarter, but kind of once we came out of the main COVID related restrictions, we've seen it be fairly consistent. Yeah. And again, what we're seeing is the majority are for sale, maybe in and about half or thereabouts, and then another 17-18% are because the landlord needs it for their own use or that of a family member. Okay,
thanks, Anne-Marie. And look, can I just say, reading your statement in terms of the recent changes the government announced in terms of the rental sector, I think you've given a balanced assessment, to be fair. I know you didn't welcome every aspect of it, but you did welcome many aspects of it, and I think that's good. My time is really tight, so I need to move on if I can. I'll just turn to the IPAV if I may. And I suppose you didn't give a positive assessment of the recent changes to the rental sector. Your opening statement, I suppose, is quite critical of government on management of the whole rental sector as a whole from a number of perspectives. Can I just ask you at the outset, in terms of the changes to the RPZs and so on, from your perspective, do you see it doing anything to improve investment in the private market, in the private rental sector?
Thank you, Deputy Cathaoirleach. Indeed, we were quite positive towards the changes and the amendments. We support them 100%, and we think that they're very, very good, and we're delighted that at last there seems to be some changes in the RPSEDs. Going forward, obviously to get more property into the rental market is what we'd like to do, and we can see ways to do that. And some of the ways obviously are to encourage new landlords into the marketplace. We can't encourage them by continually giving them legislation all of the time and regulation. That's not the way to go. We see the big stick needs to be put away and the carrot needs to be brought out, and we need to encourage people into this market right now. But I suppose some of the changes that are made are very important, and there are some other changes that should be made, we believe, that are very, very important, and that is the ending of those leases at some time, those history leases of some description. So we've talked about 8 to 10 years for this, and we believe that that actually should happen. 10 years we'd be happy with to see, but at least it gives the opportunity to get once and for all rid of the RPSEDs in one way or another, the term leasing, but obviously not from the point of view of a market, some way or another in the rental market, that there should be some limits as to what people can charge and everything. We're happy with that, but we do believe that those tenancies should end, and that there should be a time frame there for people, because many landlords are actually well paid below market rent for properties.
We've only 4 minutes in this session, Chair, is it?
Yeah, hold on.
Okay. Sorry, Pat, for interrupting.
It's okay, thank you.
Really caught for time. But look, I suppose I'm just struck by your opening statement where you say if you would disagree that the rental market, that what we now have is a broken system. Even after the changes, are you still saying it's a broken system?
Well, I think it's a broken system from the point of view that it's very unfair at the moment in the rental market. For some landlords can get A rent and some landlords can get B rent. So I think that's very unfair. I think it's a broken system that we can't get more landlords into the market, and I think we have many ideas that would get many more landlords into the market, and we're delighted that the Minister is at least listening to what people who are on the ground have to say, which is very important.
Can I just throw one further brief question? In terms of the smaller landlords, you make the point that they are exiting the sector. Do you see that trend continuing?
You've talked about 3,000 NOTs there at the moment, and you've talked about they leaving the marketplace, and I think that may well be correct. And we brought this issue first of all to government in 2018, where landlords were leaving the marketplace, and many people didn't believe it, but we've seen a lot of them leaving since. But obviously many landlords, what their problem is that if they're getting a low rent for a property, there's nothing they can do. How do they get that rent up? You can't change it. There's no time frame there to change it. So what they have to do to sell that property is they have to get vacant possession. So they have to give an NOT. And that is a problem in the marketplace at the moment, and we need to address that. And then we won't be looking at these 3,000 that you're speaking about.
Okay, look, I'll get to the IPOA in the next session, hopefully.
Right,
thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Just was remitted me, and I meant to say it when introducing Pat. Pat, I think this will be his last engagement in a public forum. He's retiring from his role as CEO of IPOA, so we thank you for your long years of contribution to the organisation, and we welcome Genevieve McGilty, who's taken over in the role as well.
Genevieve is here with us at the moment. Presently there, the lady on the right-hand side.
Deputy Owner Breen.
Thanks, Chair. Wish Pat the best. I suspect it won't be the last that we see you. You might not be formally here as IPAF, but I suspect you'll be about the house, all right? Look, given the short amount of time, I have 2 questions for Threshold, but thanks to everybody for the submissions. 2 very specific questions, John Mark and Anne-Marie. The first one is, could you, I suppose, set out your view of what we know so far of the market reset proposals in the RPZ reforms for new and first-time tenancies from March of next year? I know we haven't seen the legislation, but can you set out what you think the impact of those on tenants will be? And the second, obviously, is we've also had the announced changes to apartment standards, and there's been a lot of discussion around the impact that will have on viability. Again, maybe you might want to give the view from the tenant's point of view as to what you think the impact of those new design standard regulations will be. Thanks, Chair.
So in regards to market rent reset, so overall we're very supportive of what's been proposed in regards to security of tenure and the limitation of the no-fault evictions. However, the proposal to allow a market rent reset at different points, in particular at the turnover of a tenancy where the tenant leaves their own choice, or if they've been evicted for breaching the agreement. That is a concern. We think that will actually undermine the entire security of tenure that is being proposed. And also, what we do see at present is tenancies do tend to turn over about every 3 to 4 years, whether of a person's choice or not. And if we continue in that vein, probably within a very short space of time, maybe 4 to 5 years, we'll actually see the majority of rents at market rent. So we'll actually have a far more expensive rental market.
And just to be clear on that, so your assessment is within a 4 to 5 year period, you think the majority of tenants, because of that churn in the market, will essentially be moving towards full market rents?
Yeah, exactly. And that'll people will be priced out of their home or potentially priced out of their community and be paying everyone will be paying those much higher rents. And while the RPZs aren't being ended on a certain day, by allowing, and that cliff edge scenario has been avoided by allowing the change to happen on an individual tenancy basis, it's creating a cliff edge for each and every individual household, just at different points. So if somebody
can I sorry for cutting across you, but can I ask you this? If you remember back in 2014 and 15, the first driver of family homelessness, that rise in family homelessness, wasn't vacant possession evictions, but was inability to pay the rising rent, which led to the RPZs. Are you fearful then that we could be in a similar situation where vacant possession NTQs are replaced by tenants unable to pay rents going into a new tenancy or at the end of the reset?
That's a possibility, and I was actually working in homeless services when we started to see those economic, at the time there were economic evictions, rents were legally increased, person couldn't afford them. What it might have is people have to move for whatever reason, and they go into a tenancy, it's already high, they'll probably struggle to pay it from the beginning and eventually possibly fall into arrears and lose their home. Yeah, because as it is, there's people, particularly at the lower end of the market, who are struggling to pay. Yeah.
And then briefly on the apartment standards, just in terms of potential impact on tenants.
Yeah, if I may, Deputy, just in relation to the first element, the role of HAP is absolutely key here, because if we're finding a situation of a critical mass of families and individuals who simply can't afford the higher rent levels, then there's a question of how does the state bridge that gap between what the market then can command and what household budgets can extend to. And that will be a large kind of budgetary consideration for government over the coming years, because HAP already is a very, very costly but necessary measure in the current housing climate. Regarding the standards, we're urging caution in relation to the standards. We absolutely understand the importance of supply, and we understand the importance of trying to find the right measures to facilitate and incentivise that enhancement of supply. However, changes to apartment size, changes to aspect, from dual aspect to single aspect, they do make a difference. I'm reminded, I come from Glasgow, post-war, there was building on an industrial scale by social housing providers, a lot of single aspect, a lot of high density on a massive scale. And it's taken decades and billions of pounds as it transpires to basically detonate and raise those flats to the ground. I myself had a single aspect apartment, bought it. It's kind of grim in the winter, actually. It's kind of grim. It had a northeastern kind of aspect. Not somewhere you'd want to spend the rest of your days, to be honest with you. So I understand the overall objective of government to try and stimulate supply, but I would really caution whether some of those measures have gone too far in terms of impairing people's quality of life because of the impact. And also psychologically, it might be fine for one person, even a couple. You bring in children to the equation of a very small apartment. You bring multi-generational households living in those apartments, because time goes on, life it happens, and you can only imagine the physical and mental stresses that might ensue. So it's about treading carefully with regard to those measures.
All right, thanks Chair. Very much, Deputy Joe Cooney or Senator Murphy. What do you think first? That Deputy Joe Cooney.
Yep. Okay, the RTB Just a query on how the system runs. I'm aware of a landlord that made a payment on the 20th of May. The landlord, I'd say early June, got a letter back saying that there was no payment made, which it was made. And on the 14th of June, got a final reminder. And at that stage, the landlord actually sent a second cheque because of serious concern, maybe that she misled the first one. But lo and behold, a few days after, there was a letter got back acknowledging that the first...
Sorry to just interrupt. I think you might be directing your question at the wrong... Who are you directing the question?
At the RTB, no.
RTB, no, it is in the next session.
It's in the next session. Sorry, Chairman.
Yeah.
I'll hand off to PJ so and I'll get this ready, okay?
Good morning, Gaelic. And just and for the Property Owners Association there, I'm from the South Galway area, the Gortconvera Municipal District, which is a very rural rent pressure zone within commuter distance of Galway City. And I suppose over the last number of years, we've a very noticeable trend in the area where what I call accidental landlords, people who came into ownership of a house through a family bereavement, became landlords, rented to one tenant, considered it to be a bad experience. Once that tenancy finished, never re-entered the rental market again. And the houses are very often left vacant. And that's becoming a greatly increasing trend in the rent pressure zone in South Galway, which, as I said, is a very rural rent pressure zone. I'm just wondering, as representatives of property owners, what do you see as a means of making the whole experience of being a landlord for these people who never intended to be a landlord a better experience? And what potentially could be done to bring all of these houses back into the rental market? Thank you.
Yeah, there's a couple of things. The first thing is that this idea of 1 month's rent, 1 month's deposit given at the start of a tenancy is ridiculous. It doesn't cover the tenant who has to give notice, which is minimum a month. So straight away you're down there. You're always on the back foot compared to tenancy law, and it's just a fact the way it is. When you look at Galway in particular and empty properties, it's very difficult to convince somebody to be a landlord because there's a lot of things against you as a landlord, not only societal, but even trying to raise funds or trying to keep the property going. Obviously, if you have somebody in South Galway, and if they take on a tenant now before the 1st of March, they are stuck at the 2% or the HICP. We know the HICP for them the 1st of January 25 to the 1st of January 26 is 0.7%. My insurance on one property went up 28%. Like, it's just ridiculous that you're stuck at this. But not only that, you're stuck at it until the tenant goes at some stage, if they go. So you're back at the sitting tenant scenario that we had many years ago. It is very hard to sell anybody an idea of putting in 100,000, 200,000, $500,000 of your own money into a product that you can never get back. Why would you do it? You go straight to the bank, they drop their interest rates, you go to Raising Bank, they drop their interest rates, you go to the stock market, you do whatever. But at least you can get your asset back. With the proposals that we see in front of us, really you cannot get your asset back. Obviously, if it's one property and one tenant as you're speaking about, your friend is really lucky. But let's say that that's a 4-bed house and that they let it out on 4 separate tenancies, or it's a pre-63 building in 4 units. Then they are not lucky, because what will happen is that those 4 beds have 4 separate tenancies. They're a large landlord. They let out from the 1st of March 2026. They're then on a period of 6 years. Now, if you have 4 units, your tenants don't all come in together. They come in year 1, they come in year 3, year 4, year 5. As those years go by, this 6-year gets extended and extended. Now, let's say I want to retire in 20 years' time. By the time I get to my final 6 years, 3 of those units are going to be vacant for a long number of years because I cannot put anybody into them unless I'm really sure that that person is going to move out. And this, again, is another reason why a lot of these rules are bad, because it affects... If I'm looking at a tenant that I'm taking in on my last final 6 years routine, I'm going to look for a transient tenant. I'm not going to take in an older person, which would have been ideal because they don't party, they pay their rent on time, they're generally quiet. No, I'm going to take in a young person from somewhere foreign who will hopefully go home in a couple of years. So there is so much against it, it's very hard to convince your friend to stay. And that's why so many guys are getting out of the business.
Do you, as an organisation, have any set of proposals that you've made to improve the situation for these accidental landlords that I described?
Can I get a very short answer, 30?
Not particularly for accidental landlords. Obviously, on our opening statement, we can see the three major problems that we're having with this proposed legislation. There's a constitutional end of it, which really is a constitutional end, because the idea that you're not allowed, that you are forced to sell to somebody in particular, for instance, if you're forced to sell to another landlord, that has to be a constitutional, there's no other asset that you can buy that you are forced to sell it. You're not forced on the stock market to sell it to somebody else in particular. So from that point of view, there has to be a constitutional element to it. The capital value of the property obviously is going to...
Sorry, I'm going to have to move
Okay,
on.
sorry, my apologies.
Deputy Rory Hearn.
Good Chair, thank you to my guests. To threshold first, I'll just ask questions, maybe you can respond at the threshold. Just in terms of, you highlight there the concern that rents will increase as a result of the latest changes. What sort of level of rents do you think do you see increasing? Also, do you see homelessness rise as a result of that? Maybe you could give some estimation of the impact of that. The other question then is to the landlord organisations. Firstly, how have landlords responded to the latest measures around the changes to the RPZs? Is there any sort of issue, or do you see, or landlords informing you that they're going to issue notices to quit, for example, between now and the 1st of March in order to essentially be in a situation from the 1st of March where they can charge market rent? And do you, in your own view, see a role for any control on rents? And finally, the question is, if being a landlord is actually made more financially attractive, does that not mean that you have more money chasing kind of a limited supply? So, for example, if it's more incentivised to be a landlord, you will have more people wanting to invest in property. So, for example, they would be competing then with home buyers to purchase second homes, first homes, and therefore that leads to inflation in house prices. If you could have a comment on that. And finally, for the landlords, are you aware of many landlords turning to Airbnb or potentially turning to Airbnb as a result of that? Thanks.
So in regards, thank you, Deputy. In regards to your first question about the level of potential rent increases, yes, it would be beyond sort of our remit to be able to project that, but based on the individual property level analysis done by the SRI for the RTB, what we do see is those jumps in rents at the turnover of a tenancy. And if I remember off the top of my head, it's something about 8%. Maybe it's higher than that, sorry, now I can't remember, but we have the potential to see that. So if we do have a situation where landlords, let's say, are choosing to take those shorter term tenants, we could start to see these jumps every year in rents if they do opt for those. But I guess with this, and maybe with a couple of the announcements we've seen recently, we haven't necessarily seen that modelling to be done to see what the impact would be in respect of the impact on the rents, but also the impact it will have on the supply, because obviously the other side of these proposals are to entice institutional investors to invest and to build more. So we haven't seen that yet, so we can only guess at the moment based on the limited information available. And I think John Mark's just going to speak to the other question. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Deputy. Yeah, regarding homelessness, again, you'd need to model it, but I would go back to 2013 to 2016, the period of the early recovery, where this very, I guess, phenomenon took place, whereby you had a wholesale increase in rents from the recovery, albeit from a relatively low base of rent levels, and that increase in things like the rent supplement levels not keeping pace or mismatches geographically. Ultimately, there was a growing number of households with an increasing inability to keep up the rental payments, and therefore you had economic eviction, and you had that kind of ramping up of people moving into homelessness. So we've been here before in relation to a period where there's been no or low imposition on rent levels by legislation, and it was only when the RPZs came in that there was a kind of a very solid moderation.
I would just say that I'm in the office all the time. The amount of calls that we've got generally around people in fear of the situation and losing their properties is incredible. Now, some of them are not serving notice yet. They're monitoring it and they're looking at the situation. So a lot of these people are in the market quite a while. Their families have been in the market generations before. They saw the damage that the formerly rent-controlled properties did. And we still see them coming up every now and then, where the properties basically went down through owners' families, with the rent being so low that the capital gains that the inheritor had to pay for was so huge that sometimes the properties weren't even worth it, that you just couldn't sell them. So the massive difficulties around that. But what we've got now is a group of people that should hold property basically till they die, because that's what's going to be the most tax efficient thing for them to do. And they're moving out of that and they're looking at just selling. And these are the very people you want to keep in the market. These are the people who have low rents. Their tenants are there with them a long time. They don't want to do it to their tenants. They really don't. They do not want to give notice. They're at a stage in their lives where they have maybe paid down most of their debt, and they can afford to keep the rents low. And then at the other side of that, we've got the other group of people that are caught in a rent pressure zone. They came into the market possibly later, and they're in a situation now that the rent pressure zone for them, their tenants are never going to leave. They've low rents, and they will continue to have low rents. So it's going to be uneconomic for them to stay in the market, and they will move out. And somebody asked about what needs doing as well. The Residential Tenancies Act itself is incredibly complex. It is a disaster. It is bureaucratic. You really need to be a barrister to serve a notice and get it right. And the amount of times that a landlord will come along and think they've done things right, and it'll come back that something's missing. There's a date out, something, and some of the stuff can be minor. Statute declaration. The two of you own the property. You've always managed it. You signed it. It's not valid. Two of you had to sign it. The amount of things within the legislation that are problematic and difficult are incredible. The timelines are incredible, and to get a case through the RTB, the dispute timelines are so slow. So even the people now that are considering selling are nearly frightened to give notice because of what they're bringing on themselves. The timeline and everything else, the overholding. The legislation is totally unbalanced. A landlord will be penalised if a landlord steps out of line in any shape or form, but a tenant that overholds isn't. So it's hugely difficult.
Thanks very much, Stanley.
Thanks, Mayor, and welcome to the witnesses as well. Could I just start with the Irish Property Owners Association, just in relation to the number of tenancies and the number of landlords. That's decreasing all the time. Is that correct? That's been decreasing. Both have. Okay. The RTB, their figures show that the actual number of registered private tenancies is up 4.6% annually, 340,604.
That's correct.
And the number of landlords grew by 1.4% in the last 12 months. So, where's the mix?
Why is that? You're wondering why is that?
In a word, what's the problem? Is landlords aren't being honest and registering? Is that what's happening?
That's one side to it. The other side to it, obviously, is that last November the RTB sent out 16,000 emails to numerous non-registered landlords and registered landlords. So that would have encouraged more and more guys to register. But absolutely, the registration numbers in certain counties were way below what they should have been. Galway in particular was bad, and so was Donegal.
There are other figures that show the actual number of tenancies, the number of units rented are actually up. The number of overall units are up.
The overall units
are figures that are showing that. Is that correct?
Sorry, cost rental is now included. And it
I'm
wasn't
talking private residents.
They are also registered with the RTB now, so
I understand that.
Figures.
There's an argument that they've changed the goalposts as to how they looked at the counting. They have they moved along from the old system where it was every 4 years you were registered, or every 6 years you were registered, and their amount of tenancies at that stage were different. Then when they moved in and they moved to annual registration, it was almost impossible to get the registrations over the line. Numerous landlords got frustrated; they just couldn't do it. They were going back and forth and trying to do it. Yeah. So you're looking at a point in time from around 2022
we'll accept
to now.
that. I just watch Margaret just with the time. So the number of registered tenants is up, the number of registered landlords is up. I think you accept that the number of, and I understand some might not have been registered or difficult registering, but the actual number of rented units is up. Could I ask in relation to the in your opening statement where you said that in relation to tenants where they have low rents, there's evidence of black market, where black market activity, where tenants are actually renting, subletting to other tenants. Where is there much evidence of that, Horace?
Again, we're getting the calls into the office.
We did a survey and 46% of our members have had subletting, whereby they have had tenants living in a property that they did not allow the tenant, they did not give permission for the tenant to be there. So it is happening all over. Brian, it makes perfect sense. You're stuck on an old rent of 2015 plus 2% at all the years going forward, and you're now getting that for so cheap, and your mate coming in from wherever. Why wouldn't you? Make 200 quid a month out of it or whatever.
Well, just the 46% would surprise me, because just, I'm only saying from what I see, I wouldn't have thought it was anything near that. You know, of course there will always be somebody that will do that, but I wouldn't have thought it was widespread.
It's particularly strong in the Dublin area.
Right, okay. They're more honest down the country. So could I just ask in relation to, and I understand why that would be, it's more, people are more anonymous, you know. There's not as much on the ground evidence and all that. Could I ask in relation to the fix for this issue of, and I get it, you know, where a landlord has been charging historically very low rent because he's a good tenant. You know, I know people who would have a second house and they've rented somebody cheap for a number of years. They're happy enough with him there. The rent would be half what it is generally in the general area. Happy days, but obviously it can cause problems now with the new restrictions coming in. In a word, what's the fix for that? You know, is it reference rents? How do we fix that without causing some other unintended consequence? How should that be fixed from your point of view?
We had suggested, the IPOA had suggested that rents will be increased by 4% a year for 4 years and then revert to market rent at year 5, so that it wouldn't just completely fall off a cliff. But some of the rents are extremely low, and the tenants just aren't moving. And
so you say, Mary, that to revert to the market, the average market rent in the area? In the general area? In year 5, yeah. Right. So what you're saying is, just say I'm charging 60% now of what the market rent is in an area. So I continue charging 60%, I go up 4% each year. On year 5, then it levels out, it comes up to whatever the market rent is in the area.
Well, as Anne-Marie said, most tenancies last from 3 to 4 years. Yes. So if a tenant knows that the rent is going to be at market rent by year 5, they know and they can plan for moving before that, if they feel that the rent is going to be too strong at year 5.
So in effect it becomes a reference rent.
I suppose you put it that way, yeah.
Okay, just to look at the size of the property or other factors. And just what's the highest proportion of a person's net income or household income should be spent on rent? Just from your experience.
Generally, I would look at 35%.
Of net income?
Yes, of take-home income.
All right, thank you. Thanks very much. We'll move on to Senator Robert McCarthy.
Thank you, Cahill, and thank you to all of the witnesses for being here today. I've read your statements, and just looking at the different interests, etc., the fundamental problem seems to be that demand far exceeds supply. And I'm just wondering, and I've talked about it in this House before, that would emergency planning laws, planning powers fast track the delivery of housing and then help unlock stalled supply? But from my own experience, I set up a homeless charity called Tiglin, and we work with people from a cohort, usually of addiction, marginalisation. But last Friday I went to see Tabor House in Navan, and you've 12 individuals there that have come through a wonderful rehabilitation programme, similar to our own, and they're ready to hit the road. But the problem is their HAP is not being accepted by any landlord. So it's not because of their background, not because of anything, but it's just HAP itself. And I'm just wondering, is there something that needs to be looked at, or has the economics simply stopped working for HAP? That's one of the questions. Another question I'd love to ask is if you could change one thing regarding housing supply and how to unlock it, particularly for lower income families or vulnerable households, what would that be? And if you saw the briefing today from St Vincent de Paul, it's about setting up a homeless prevention budget. So I'm wondering what your thoughts on that. And lastly, even for threshold, I'm wondering, the new planning laws reducing the housing units to 32 square metres, what are your thoughts on that? The Minister is saying it should benefit the builder by bringing down the costs, but it should benefit the purchaser by lowering the price. And I'm wondering, how do you do all that? So just your views on those, please.
So can I take the half one first of all? I know a lot of landlords are nervous of it because in some instances it can take 4 to 5 months to get paid. So no landlord is in a position to wait to get paid for 4 to 5 months. And really the delays seem to be in the HAP system, that it's just squeezed too tight, and that is a challenge for most landlords.
Has that ever been lobbied? Has that ever been challenged?
I'm not quite sure. I know there was a change that if the tenant then stops paying their proportion to the council, that the council would pay for a couple of months and then completely stop paying all. And that's another fear, that something will happen. The tenant, they stop paying the council, and then the landlord completely loses all his payment. And they would be the fears around for landlords about taking HAP tenants.
Just a delay. Okay.
Can I take the one thing? There's two things I changed, actually, to be honest. The first thing is the bedsit ban was a mistake. It was a bad mistake when the Green Party got rid of the bedsits, because what you did was you took out the little Aldi's and you kept Super Queen. That's basically what you did, and you lashed up the prices and you took out the whole bottom tier of the market. The new legislation that's being proposed for the pre-63s and the house shares, that again is taking out the lower tier, the cheaper, the 600, 700, 800 a month properties around Dublin. And that is a mistake, because it's having a massive effect from the point of view of people living at home until they're 40, from the point of view of, I let out a place, I have over 200 people coming to view it. I know only one person's going to get it. They know that too. So from that point of view, it has distorted the market incredibly. And the second thing I get rid of is the rent controls. And I can totally understand that if Owen was here, he'd be given out to me. But in reality, when you look throughout the world, who has done it properly? Finland has done it properly. They had the same system as we, now it wasn't as punitive as ours. They got rid of it, it worked. Argentina has only been doing it for a year and a half, and it would appear that rents are now dropping, and the amount of supply, according to the Wall Street Journal, is up 170%. So the rent controls stifle landlords coming into the market, stifle supply, stifle everything.
Yeah,
and until we have an increase, sorry.
Perfect.
Thank you very much.
And just the threshold is my final question, if you could.
Yeah, thank you very much, Senator. Regarding the minimum standards, I guess I touched on it earlier, and I advise caution. And again, we understand why the department and why the minister is looking to stimulate supply. But you know, if we're looking at houses, homes that people are to live in, thrive in, have children in, have you know, all aspects of their lives in. You know, a single aspect home can be a fairly grim prospect, especially in the winter months. And you know, I think 32 square metres is really very, very small. If you're also working from home, a lot of people are working on a hybrid basis, so I'd advise caution.
Thank you, Ciara.
Thank you, Deputy Joe Flaherty.
Thank you very much, Chair. I want to welcome all the speakers, and in particular the representatives of the property owners and of course the IPAV. I want to wish Genevieve McGurk the very best in her new role, which she takes up on the 1st of August. And obviously, Pat, we'll miss you from here. You were a great voice for the market and for auctioneers. And I'm especially pleased to see landlords represented here. For too often, we don't hear the voice of landlords, and it's a very important voice. And everybody here appreciates we have a housing crisis, and there's many victims of the housing crisis, namely people that can't get accommodation. But an unheard of victim in all of this has been the mamas and pops landlords, the small scale landlord who, but despite our best efforts, we've driven out of the market as a government and as legislators, and we have to stand up and take ownership. And I'd agree with you, Pat, that the system is broken, and all we're doing with it is tinkering with it. And if we cast our minds back, and Fintan McGill from Longford will be familiar with this, in 2008 when the crash came, we had 2,500 vacant properties in Longford. Every one of them were investor properties, mom and pops investors that bought it for a pension fund. If we hadn't those 2,500 houses, we'd be in a diabolical situation in this country, and that's replicated right across the country. We don't like international investors, we know that. Our opposition parties don't like that. And what we need to do, we need to make it attractive for the small investor, the small landlord to come back into the market, and we're not doing that. And nobody in the government has ever grabbed the big issue of the day, and we need to make it financially incentivised for landlords to come back into the market. We had Section 23, we had the rural renewal scheme, much criticised in the aftermath of the crash. But at the same time, they were the schemes to give us 2,500 houses in Longford when we need them now, desperately need them, because we have no other houses that were built. And I suppose my question to both of you is it time for the government to look at an incentive scheme for small-scale landlords to come back into the market, be it we incentivise them through taxation or we incentivise them through pension, that they can get a pension top-up later. So that's basically for the property owners and for the IPAV, please. I'd like to get both perspectives.
Okay. Yes, you're right. Look, the first thing that they can do is, and the most logical thing, if I was Minister for Finance tomorrow, is I would turn around and I would bring back in the 2012 to 2019 capital gains tax rollover relief. Because with this new legislation coming down the road, and with the numbers that we can see are talking to us about notices to quit and how to get out and this, that and the other, there's an awful lot of money sitting around.
I can see that, but what I'm asking you is, we need something to get people back in at scale. That's going to address one of your
One
members.
way is the rollover release on capital gains. You're absolutely right. Section 23, some way
address.
that it makes sense. This idea that you were taxed at 52% on all the rent, it just really isn't financially viable if the rents are only able to go up 0.7% in 2025.
So basically, we have to incentivise landlords to get back into the market.
They have to, absolutely. And if they were incentivising, they wouldn't be leaving.
Okay.
And I think, I'm a proud culture, I'm a Sligo woman. I think the debate is always too Dublin focused, and that we forget what's going down the country, because if a landlord leaves down the country, they're not going to be replaced by another one. And that's really of big concern to us. At least in Dublin, the institutional investors, whether we like them or hate them, they're still providing housing. But the country really needs a bit more focus, and I would absolutely agree there needs to be some kind of an incentive.
Well, I'd agree with you. You'll never hear somebody around the country saying they're buying a house to rent it out. That's not going to happen now. The IPAV, do we need to incentivise people, be it Section 23, rural renewal scheme, to get building, get these mom and pops landlords back into the market?
Thank you, Senator, and thank you for your lovely comments as well. Yes, I believe this, and we've called for this many times, that Section 23 would come back again, and that it should come back in to incentivise landlords to come into the market. And while I am aware Deputy Stanley could have quoted figures for 1 year ago, is that there is extra landlords in the market and there's extra tenants in the market. But if you go back many years before that, you'll find that from 21 to 23 we lost 400,000 landlords, and those figures are with the RPZ or with the PRTB. So, we can look at 1 year if we want, if that's really what we're going to be looking at in the rental market, but it's a lot longer than 1 year, and the history is a lot longer than that. So we need to bring people back into the market.
I'm just conscious of time, and I just want to pursue this in relation to Section 23.
Yeah.
In relation to your discussions with government, and particularly with the Department of Finance, have you been given any indication that there's something similar to a Section 23 possible in the budget?
Well, we haven't been kicked out, let's put it like that, and we have talked to the government about it on numerous occasions. And the big thing about it is we don't have to bring back in a Section 23 like what we had prior. We could bring in something different, and I'm sure the Department of Finance could come up with something different. But whether we like it or we don't like it, to get landlords back in the market, we need something, an incentive for them to get back into the marketplace.
And finally, in a couple of words, the biggest single and quickest fix for us for the rental market is to get mom and pop landlords in, and the quickest way to do that is financially incentivise them.
Well, it's the only way. That's simply it. 5 words.
Thanks.
Thank you, Senator.
Thanks very much. Deputy Thomas Gould.
Yeah, listen, thanks very much. Appreciate you being here. And I suppose, first of all, in relation to threshold, the tenant in situ and the gutting of that and the limiting of funding, to me, that was the best method that the government and local authorities had of preventing homelessness. I've dealt with loads of landlords in Cork who were willing to sell, who wanted to keep the tenants in the property. The council wanted to buy them, the tenants wanted to stay there. It's one of the few things where everyone was on the one page. In Cork, this prevented 100 children from entering homeless last year, and I think it was 65 adults. And just like a response we got to a question that our councillor Michelle Gould put into Cork City Council, In 2021, 110 families, 224 children went into homeless accommodation, emergency accommodation. In 2022, it was 127 families and 235. And just to skip ahead, for the first 6 months of this year, 149 families with 292 children in emergency accommodation is going to be the highest figure of all time. Do you feel that what's after happening now with tenants in situ will virtually at a stop is going to lead to more homelessness?
Yeah, so we were very supportive of the tenant in situ scheme. We saw it as a very effective intervention in preventing homelessness. Obviously, there's been some difficulties in the actual doing of it. You know, I suppose buying and selling a house is always difficult and complicated. But its overall purpose, we're very supportive of, and we did want to see it expanded. And we actually want to see it become part of the mainstream delivery of social housing. Now, while some will say, well, it doesn't actually add stock, it does add to the social housing stock, and this would lead into the Housing Commission's recommendation to increase social and cost rental to 20% of all stock. So we were quite shocked to see how quickly the funds ran out this year, and so it's now basically not available as a homeless intervention tool for the remainder of the year in the vast majority of local authorities. So instead of being, I guess, a financial allocation, we'd like to see it set out as there's a target of the number of homes that need to be purchased under tenant in situ each year, and that figure to be determined based on the number of notices of termination that are being submitted to the RTB.
No, thank you for that. And for the landlords, like, there was a lot of good, decent landlords out there who wanted to look after their tenants, who wanted to work with the council. Like, sometimes I don't agree with everything that happens with landlords, but you have to respect the vast majority of decent people. And they were left stranded in all this then. They were left stranded for months. Like, from your point of view, like, was there a lot of disappointment the way the tenants in situ was gutted?
Yeah, I mean, we know a few people who were 2 years pushing and pushing, trying to complete, to keep their tenant in situ. And in the end, they had to give up because they were under pressure from the banks, and they just had to sell and had to issue termination notices. So as you say, it's a win-win for everybody, for the landlord, for the tenants. And, you know, to think that the funds have run out in something like March this year seems absolutely crazy. I have a tenant who, have a landlord who is trying to keep his tenants, and Fingal said absolutely no, but it took us 8 weeks to get a response from Fingal to say that this isn't going to happen, that they've stopped doing it. So why does it take 8 weeks to get a response to an email?
And the one thing I'd like to put on the record, I know that some landlords are actually still leaving the tenants in place, hoping that the tenants in situ will be reopened. So, like, they have to be thanked for that, and the local authorities who are doing unbelievable work. And the one point just in relation to HAP, and with rents going up now, would you recommend that HAP rates have to be matched to prevent people? I just had to step out to talk to a lady there who can't pay her rent. Her rent is $2,000 a month. She's getting the maximum HAP off Cork City Council. She's making a contribution of just over $750, and she's got 3 kids, and she also has to pay rent to the council of €48. Like, she's going to be driven into homelessness because of the cost of the rents. So would you advise an increase in HAP to match rents where they increase?
Yeah, short answer is yes. Like, there's a number of interventions. Obviously, cost rental, investing in cost rental and social housing is absolutely key, and that ramping up of cost rental. And in the interim, the housing assistance payment, a point that was made earlier, where rents will increase at the end of 6 years, that will have huge affordability issues for a growing swathe of the population. That will probably have to be addressed partly by HAP. But ultimately, structurally, we need to see larger players with a social remit providing both social housing and cost rental housing at scale, to look a bit more like our counterparts in mainland Europe.
All right, thank you. Deputy Joe Cooney.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Threshold. Again, I see here in your report, almost 3,000 renters came to Threshold in the first 6 months of 2025. Homeless is an awful issue for a family or an individual. Why do you think this has gone so prominent at the moment, and what's causing it?
So what we've seen is an increase in landlords selling. Now, we can only try and guess at the reasons why landlords sell based on what we hear reported, what we hear from some of our colleagues who are here today, and from what's in the RTB surveys of landlords. So certainly one of the first RTB surveys that was done maybe about 5 years ago, many landlords were just coming to that time when they were fit, they were getting out, they had planned to be a landlord, to have a home to retire on, they'd sell that home, and so that it was coming to that point. For some of them, the tax benefit that was mentioned, the capital gains relief that was mentioned a while ago, about 2019, we started to see that kind of come to its end, so it made sense then for some landlords then to start exiting at that point to get the benefit of that. And then what we saw in some of the most recent reports from the service of the RTB, some landlords have started to cite financial reasons as the purpose for getting out. But those, I think, from what we'd see based on the reports and the limited information out there, those are possibly some of the reasons for it.
Yeah, well, look, it's alarming when you see the amount coming to you. And again, I want to compliment you on the great work you're doing, trying to keep roofs over these people. But going back then in regard to landlords, going forward, what do we need to do to encourage landlords to stay renting? Because it's easy at the moment.
Taking away half the regulations. Like Margaret said earlier, the regulations are unbelievably complex. Not only have you got the 200 and odd pages of the Rental Tenancy Act 2004, you've got the standards in a flat. 2011, it was about 20 pages long. It's now well over 100 pages long. Just the standards alone as to what you have to put into a flat. The regulations have just come on and come on and come on. And what's happened is that all these housing committees, since 2004, just keep on adding in amendments. It actually needs to be restarted and rethought. And it would make it so much better for renters and for landlords, because it's just so complicated. And there's no reason for it to be, but it is. That would be one of the major things on it. The tax, as we mentioned earlier, does not make it really financially viable. And the rent controls, if you look at it, if you leave it at 2%, so I let out a flat in 2015. At present, I'm getting what I let it out for, plus probably about 11, 12%. I'm at 2% or the HICP, 0.7%, 2025, for the rest of that tenant's life, or unless I can sell that place and I'm a small landlord. From that point of view, in 10 years' time, that rent is going to be so below what the levels of rents are, because inflation is not 0.7% 2025. Milk used to be 75 cents, it's now 1.25 a litre. So inflation has gone way up, and we need a mechanism to bring those existing nearly 240,000 tenancies into the real world. And that's how you get the existing to stay. It's easier to keep existing landlords than it is to get new ones.
Well, we need to simplify the criteria and the red tape that's there. And if we don't, we'll actually have less landlords in the market. Just come back to Dr. Neil and Pat, what do you think can encourage people to buy property and rent it to tenants? It's going the opposite way. Is there anything more that can be done from your side of it? What's your view and the background you have?
Thank you, Deputy. I suppose one of the big things is, and the 3,000 figure that we've talked about here, the threshold I've spoken about, the one big thing, the reason for those people selling is because they want to get vacant possession of their property to sell it. That's really the big reason. And it's the one reason that we haven't discussed here. We've been going around about it, flirting around about, talking about different things, but that's one of the biggest reasons. And until such time as that's changed, that will continue happening, the landlords leaving. And as Maurice has said, it's much easier to keep a landlord in the market than to try and get a new one into it. But if we have to get a new one into it, we need encouragement. Encouragement. Let them be incentives, let them be whatever. But we need to get landlords into the market, so we have to encourage them to come back into the marketplace. And at the moment, when you buy a property for 345,000, as in my statement, and you rent it out to somebody, you get 1 month's deposit up front and you get 1 month's rent. But if you have to give an NOT to that person, it actually takes you 56 days notice to do that, which means that you're behind a month's rent already. And it's ridiculous, to say the least. And there needs to be changes in the law, and big changes in the law. And it needs to be done sooner than later if we're going to bring more landlords into the marketplace. Thank you, Deputy.
My belief is if there's a change in the law sooner than later, we'll have a lot more people homeless if we don't do something going forward.
All right, thanks very much. Next we have the second Fianna Fáil slot, so Deputy McGrath, 3 minutes.
Yeah.
Thanks very much, Cahir. Look, if I can, at the outset, maybe turn to the IPOA, because I didn't get to you in the last session. Can I just ask a direct question, I suppose? And look, I've had landlords contact me, I suppose particularly those that are classified as large landlords, but yet maybe quite small, may have 6 units, 5 units, 7 units and so on. Do you see a lot of them exiting the market before March because of the changes that are coming after March?
I think some landlords are concerned that if they have properties coming off interest only, or they're coming under pressure, and that they now feel that they better issue their termination notice now and sell and try and sort out the stuff with their banks, because it'll be much more difficult to do it after March, when you can only do a no-fault eviction. And I know that's driving a lot of fear with a lot of landlords, particularly those under financial pressure.
You're getting a lot of inquiries in relation to that space in terms of those landlords that are classified as large landlords, but not necessarily the institutional landlord. They're ordinary landlords, if you like, but they have more than 4 properties.
It's 4 tenancies actually, not 4 properties. So if you have a house in multiple units and you have 6 units in it, it's going to be very difficult to get vacant possession of all units to sell it.
Okay. And look, if I can quickly turn to the IPAV and just ask a question. In your opening statement, I suppose you referred to the negative controls on landlords. You say it needs to turn more towards incentives. You mentioned Section 23. Could I just get you to elaborate? What exactly are you referring to as incentives? What are you calling for?
We're referring to some sort of an incentive that will get landlords into the marketplace, and it's obviously tax is the big thing at the moment. So, like, from the point of view, if they happen to buy a property, like, you know, that they could get a tax allowance every year on that property that they buy for a number of years. Now, there's many ways you could do this, and I think the Department of Finance can well come up with a way that maybe not something like, or something too unlike the Section 23. But the big thing about these things is they don't have to go on forever. They have to go on until such time as they do their work. The Section 23 went on forever, and I think a lot of people felt that it couldn't be changed or whatever. But so until such time as that does its work and gets landlords into the marketplace, then it can be actually wiped out and there's no problem.
Are you absolutely saying tax incentives are needed?
Well, tax incentive are the big things, because by the time the landlord pays all his charges and then pays 52% of what's left, which is the net profit that he has, the net profit at the end of the day, there's very little left for the landlord. If you look at the scenario that I've put in my front statement, where you buy a property for 345,000, which is a small amount of money, as you know, at the moment in the marketplace, to get something to rent at that level. So Section 23, I think, is very, very important. Obviously, the tax element, if you took the tax element out, instead of paying 48 or 52% for landlords, that was brought down to a figure of 30%, which we actually thought was going to happen a couple of years ago, but it didn't happen.
Okay. No, thank you for that. And just to threshold very briefly, and look, I was going to ask about HAP limits. Deputy Gould referred to that question. Can I just ask in relation to the tenants that are in contact with you? And look, I do thank you for the work you do, because, you know, as public reps, we regularly are engaging with tenants who are in touch with yourselves. But just in terms of people who are served with notice and they present for homeless accommodation, are you noticing a trend where it's more difficult to secure homeless accommodation through the local authorities? Because I'm certainly noticing that as a public representative, and I'm just wondering, are you picking up on that trend as well? That they are citing maybe, you know, you can go back to family accommodation, or you can do something else other than present as homeless. Is that something you're noticing?
Thank you very much, Deputy. It hasn't been brought to my attention of recent. We did see it start happening a couple of years ago, and ourselves and other organisations engaged with members of this committee on that at the time. But no, just of recent, it hasn't been brought to my attention, but I'm definitely going to make sure I check in with our advisors to see in case it is. What we do find is, I suppose there's a little bit maybe more pushback perhaps. Local authorities are more inclined to go talk to Threshold. No, you have to go bring that to the RTB. No, you need to challenge that. No, so they'll try and push it out for as long as they can, which does result then sometimes in people possibly overholding. Yeah.
All right, thanks very much. And I just might ask Deputy McGrath just to step in for 2 minutes. Deputy Gould is next in the Sinn Féin slot, which I'm in. I'm going to give you 3 minutes. I'm going to add a few minutes onto the session, if you don't mind, before 15, to give an opportunity for members of questions. I just have to step out for 2 minutes, so apologies.
Okay.
Deputy Gould, 3 minutes. Yeah.
Come on, good Chair. I suppose just a threshold there. I suppose when you're looking at trying to help renters and prevent people from becoming homeless, like, I've never seen the level of homelessness at the levels it's at now. And I've never seen the amount of families and children, and like, from the response people got from Cork City Council now, you've got what is it? You've got 46 families in emergency accommodation now over a year. And if you went back to 2021, there was none. So like just the escalation in 2022, there was one family, or there was 9 families. Like it's going up. Like it's an absolute crisis now, an emergency when it comes to homelessness, especially when it comes to children. And the one thing I have here, which I know is outside everyone's remit, there are enough boarded up local authority homes to house every family in the state. Like we're looking at landlords now being under pressure. We're looking at everyone is under pressure. Like from Threshold's point of view, if there was one piece of advice or one thing you would ask the government to deliver to try to prevent homelessness, what would it be? Or as a help to try to prevent homelessness with either.
Thanks very much, Deputy. Like the question of activating all possible avenues for supply is absolutely key. And there was the recent, if you like, league table of performance of local authorities in relation to delivery of social housing. And indeed, some large urban local authorities don't come out very well in that regard. For us, there's no single silver bullet. Obviously, supply is absolutely key. I did mention there the provision of social housing through either the local authorities or the approved housing bodies. The provision of cost rental, the ramping up of cost rental, the tackling of dereliction and vacancy, and by the way, that requires taxation on the other side. Rather, that does require the stick. Because very little's happening in relation to, dereliction.
And apologies for interrupting, it's just that the time is against us. And maybe for the other two groups, I have a major issue. If you look at the amount they say, there are 146,000 vacant properties. A short story. I got a property put on the Cork City Council's derelict sites list a number of years ago. I met the owner on the bar one night and he says to me, "You're an awful bags." And I said, "Why is that?" He said, "You put my property on the derelict sites list." I did. I said, it's empty 32 years. Because I went to the derelict sites list and I told the story in the last oil, he was paying 7% of the value of the house. He went away and renovated into a 3-bedroom apartment, into a 2-bedroom apartment. And it's now, if you want to Google it, there's a pub in Blarney Street in Cork called the Joshua Tree. And right next door to it, you'll see the brand new doors, the brand new windows. That landlord sat in that property. No, he had only owned it 28 years. And I said, "So for the love of God, like, 28 years, good guy, right?" But no, maybe the incentives, the new Creek Honahan and the new derelict sites funding did help. But like, what can we do to incentivise landowners and people who have these properties? What can the government do? Because we could solve a housing crisis if we could get those properties in play.
I wonder, was your friend in Cork afraid of letting out because he can't get the property back?
He had loads of properties.
He's loads of properties.
Loads of properties.
But a lot of people are afraid of letting out because they can't get their asset back. And that is what they're scared of. We know that from talking to people. And what can the government do? They can make it that it isn't so impossible to get your property back. They can change this idea of 4 tenancies, that they can change that you're not a large landlord. These are the stumbling blocks through the whole thing. If you buy an asset in any other asset class, you can get it back. But you become a landlord and you immediately start being limited by the legislation. And that is the first thing. And the only thing that would encourage your friend, or people like your friend who have vacant properties, to actually
I use the word friend now very loosely there, mate.
Sorry, I thought you were drinking, buddy.
Sorry. Pat.
The one big thing for landlords like that, and we see thousands and thousands and thousands of them across the country and indeed in Dublin, and we've raised this issue for many, many years. Indeed, one morning I raised it at a committee meeting of a particular group, and I was nearly ran out of the room. Where did these figures come from? What's the story with them, etc., etc., etc. But we all accept now that there are well over 100,000 at the worst, or at 100,000 vacant properties in the country. And many people like your friend, good thing for your friend, using the terminology again, was that they could actually do something about it, or he could do something about it. Many people can't do something about it. So that person, the one thing that person needs to do is to sell that property and sell it as quickly as he can to somebody who's going to bring it into the marketplace. And what encouragement does that that person need? When they pay their capital gains or when they get their money for their property, to get a discount on their capital gains. And that should be done for possibly 1 year or 18 months to give these landlords an opportunity to sell their properties and pay less capital gains. And I'd say it would bring huge yields. Thank you, Deputy.
Miguel's slotting in, Deputy. If you have further questions, Deputy John Cooney.
Well, if you look at it, the question I have here again, how can the three groupings work together to make more properties available for leasing? Because it seems to be the opposite way it's going at the moment. Is there a way we can bridge gaps? Is there a way we can get landlords back in to rent properties to our tenants? That seems to be the big issue. Again, in fairness to Pat, he did say landlords are nearly pulling out rather than getting involved at the moment, but we need to simplify it to see how we can get them back in. Threshold again, to get your views on the same thing. We need to do more. What's the more we can do to try and encourage landlords?
Trust, I think, is a really big part of the whole thing. So we had the rent controls came in 2016. They were supposed to be in for 3 years. Then it was 10 years. We had the Part 4s came in initially in 2004. It was 4 years to start with. Then it was 6 years. Then it's indefinite. Now we have the new proposal and it's saying that this is running on a 6-year term. How many people here actually believe that? That in 10 years' time it'll still be 6 years? Because I know a lot of our members don't believe that is going to be the case. The 6 years is going to be made indefinite forever, or it's going to be made a lot longer in period of time. And trust, I think, it has to come out that the government state, we're going to do this and we're not going to change it next week. Because for years that's what we're dealing with, legislation coming out and then some minister changes it next week. So trust, I think, is a big part that the government can do.
Trust is very important.
So one thing we've been asking for some time is a strategy or, a vision or a policy for the private rental sector, the role that it's going to play in housing delivery into the future. At present, there isn't really specific roles set out. You know, for many years, it was a transitory, sector. It was kind of the forgotten sector it was referred to as for some time. In about 2011, there was meant to be a move toward making it a more stable long-term tenure. HAP was brought in 2014 to make it, supply social housing, but that kind of then seemed to all fall by the wayside, and there's no clear path now for it. So I think there does need to be an agreement at government level. What role is it going to play into the future, in the long term, and that will guide and shape the policy and the legislation going forward. And yet we'd certainly agree that we do need that stability in policy, that stability in legislation as well. And while the current minister has said the changes that he's proposed are going to be for the long term, there's no sunset clause. We can understand why some people might think, well, the next government could change that. So no more than with Sláintrecare, and despite its challenges, there was a whole of a government cross-party support and agreement. This is the way forward. And certainly that, I think, is needed in terms of the private rental sector and the role it's going to play into the future.
Thanks very much.
Judge, I know we have a serious issue in our hands, and the outcome is going to be of what will happen after the 1st of March is going to be very interesting. But we need trust, and we need to get landlords back into the system, and if we don't, the downhill will be going. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Deputy Cooney. Now it comes just to myself. I'll try to keep it tight, and I want to let in a couple of Deputy Hearn and Deputy Stanley back in just for a couple of minutes. Just suppose IPOA, with rent increases mentioned by Threshold there earlier, what's your views on them? And I think, what do you think the landlord and tenancy figures are up over the last year? Any comments on that?
Thank you, Chair. I think the figures and the reason that Threshold talked about the rental figures going up and the rental prices going up, I don't believe that personally, and I don't think it's right to say that everybody will pay a much higher rent. I don't think that's the case. I think everybody will pay market rent, and whatever the market says, the market people will pay it. and well and good, it may well be higher for somebody who, a landlord is renting a property maybe since 2016 at 50% of the rent, and in that number of years that they're after being there, like they're after being discriminated against because they can't charge a full rent for their property. So like now we're in a situation where people can change the rent after 6 years. If you're going to be a big landlord, etc., or a small landlord, it's all the one. But if you can change the rent after 6 years, you can bring the rent up to market rent, and whatever that market rent is. And I'm actually one of the people here that have seen rents going down as well as going up. And many people, I hear them saying recently that rents never go down, and that is not the case. I've seen it in the early 2000s, not that far away, and indeed it could happen again. And I've seen landlords being under pressure, agents, the tenants coming to agents and telling them that, listen, there's another apartment out the road from here, there's another apartment in the same block, they're getting less rent and we want to change the rent and bring it down. But that has been happening. So I don't believe that the change of this particular scenario that we're talking about after the 1st of March is going to change rents and bring them up. And I think, Deputy, after the 1st of March, I think that these changes are going to be very good for a landlord. And I don't see any reason why, I'm sorry to disagree with Morris, whether they're going to be 6 years or 10 years or 26 years. I can't see what the difference is. If you're a landlord, you're a landlord. You're in the market to rent a property. You have an option to sell the property on to somebody else. I think that those properties are going to be sold at investment values. They're not going to be sold at market value any longer. They're going to be sold at investment values. So I don't see why a landlord can't sell on their property if they're living in the property, if somebody is living in the property for 6 years or 10 years or whatever. If they want to dispose of it, they can dispose of it in the marketplace. So I don't see what the problem is there, really being honest about it. So that I do think that the rents that we're speaking about are not going to happen. I can't see them happening. So I think that that's a fallacy, and I think we shouldn't be even saying that, I think, at the moment, because if you have to pay market rent, you have to pay market rent, whether it's higher or lower, it's all the one, but you have to pay it. That's the way I look at it. Chair. Thank you.
I'll go to landlord, the figures being up, landlords and tenancies.
Well, I addressed that, and I think that the landlord's figures being up and the tenants' figures being up indeed. And like Deputy Stanley talked about it, and many landlords, Deputy, and you're probably well aware of this as I am, have taken properties out of the market for 2 years because they had no choice but to do that. And those properties, some of them are coming back into the market. And you talk about a very small percentage, like 1.3 and 1.6%, which equates to roughly, from a landlord's point of view, maybe something like from a tenancy, from a lease point of view, you're talking about roughly over 2,000, and you're talking about 1,200 landlords. And those figures in the whole country of Ireland are very, very little. But the ones that have hurt the market is the ones from 21 to 23, where 40,000 landlords left the market. They're the ones that has hurted the market, not the ones that now there's a small percentage of an increase, and they're the ones that the RTB tell us about. But, you know, we can all look at different figures that's going to suit us all at different times. But we're on the ground and we're looking at what's happening on the ground. And what's happening on the ground is we don't see more landlords coming into the market. We see landlords given NOTs, is what Threshold are speaking about here. We know the reason why they're giving them, and they're selling properties. It's as simple as that. And they have been since 2018. And the figures are there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And I'm going over my time, so we're not going to take more time. Might let Deputy Hearn and Deputy Stanley in for a couple more minutes each there, just to ask direct questions.
Thank you. Just a question to Threshold and then to the landlords. Threshold, just in terms of the scale of the housing crisis, from rents to homelessness, the Housing Commission called for a radical reset of policy, and you've outlined, your agreement with that. Do you see evidence of that from the current government policy in terms of, are they doing what's needed to be done to address this emergency? If you could respond to that.
Yeah, thanks, Deputy. My understanding is they're in the process of considering a whole raft of recommendations, and I think some are probably already in train. Some are being planned. I imagine maybe some are less palatable and are maybe put to less of a priority. But I guess it's still relatively early to call because there were so many recommendations, and some have been partially completed. Some require the agency of local authorities and different players. So I guess it's something we're monitoring. I think the proof of the pudding will be in the new housing plan. I mean, for us, as Anne-Marie was saying, The challenge with Housing for All was that the private rented sector was kind of scattered, kind of balkanised across, peppercorned across the plan. I think a clear statement of intent, direction of travel with regard to rental housing and the private rented sector in particular would be very much welcome in that plan, and that will, I guess, show the bona fides of the government with regard to the Housing Commission recommendations.
Great. And to the landlord organisations, just the research actually from Threshold shows that most renters actually don't want to be renting. The figure was, I think, just 6% of those surveyed were renting by choice, and that most renters actually want to own their own home or be in social housing, having that permanent security of tenure. Do you think that there is an issue with that? And actually, when you look back at our housing tenure, just 8% of housing in Ireland in the 1990s was owned by private landlords. It was majority home ownership. And that actually the problem we're in is that we don't have high enough home ownership, and we need to be delivering homes that people can buy rather than actually more private rental will just leave people not being able to buy a home, because that's what a lot of people say, they're paying rent rather than being able to save and buy a home.
In an ideal world, everybody would have their own. But private landlords provide transient housing for people coming into work on short-term contracts from abroad, for students, for people maybe setting up homes for the first time together to see will it work out. So there is a need for private landlords in the market. And in an ideal world, it would be lovely if everybody could own their own home. But that's not going to happen anytime soon.
Thanks very much. Just the views of the Irish Property Owners Association, just in regard to top-up rents, because I've come across, right over the last 20 years, but particularly in the last 10 years, the increasing use of the rent, particularly HAP is so much, the tenant pays that to the council, but in some cases I come across where actually there's a top-up payment to the landlord that is way in excess of what the amount for the top-up. So you wind up maybe paying double or triple what the differential rent is to the local authority. Just in a word, what's your view of that? And that's widespread, because you mentioned about being on the ground. I would be fairly well on the ground for a good number of years, meeting people, and you understand it's not on one-sided, but specifically on that issue, if you could address that for me, Maurice, please. In a word, what's your view of that, and what are you doing to stamp that out among your members?
Would I be able to take it?
No, you take it.
Yeah. Sorry, just
Short
that
answer.
when HAP was introduced, there were top-ups that had to be paid by people to the landlord as well. The capital limit, and they allowed a certain amount to be topped up by the local or by the tenant themselves.
And where it's an undeclared top-up, Margaret, where the top-up is undeclared, in a word.
Now, if there's an undeclared top-up or there's money that's being paid over, that's illegal. The law is the law, and the rent must be the rent.
And you're reminding your members of that, are you?
Sorry?
Your organisation is reminding your members of that, are you?
We would always
Good.
work
My
with our
next
members
question is,
around that.
My next question is just in relation to unkept private tenancy accommodation. Inside might be great, might be kept well, where the tenant actually, the part that the tenant looks after and keeps the external, no rubbish running out around outside, but the actual condition, physical condition of the property. I mean, I could bring it to estates. I can tell you which houses are rented just by walking around it. I can tell you which house, clearly some houses you can see, some you can't tell the difference, but some you can clearly tell the difference, where they're kept in where there's clear exterior work to be done and it's not being done. What's the solution to that, Maurice?
There's obligations on both parties, on tenants and on landlords. Landlords must maintain their properties to a good standard, yes. and they should do. And tenants also must keep the properties to a good standard to a degree.
So payment management fees, where there's a management company, you come across situations where the single owners, the owner occupiers of apartments, typically they're paying. Some landlords are paying. The local authorities paying if they have a number of units in the same complex, but you come across situations, and I've certainly come across where a considerable number of private landlords who owned apartments in a complex are not paying.
Thanks very much.
What's the solution to that? In a word, just in a word.
We have a second.
It's a really important issue.
Multi-unit accommodation,
20 seconds.
Huge difficulties around getting service charges from different people. It's a huge. It needs legislation.
Which are consistent. And they will get done when they go to sell on the property because the landlord who owns the property can't get clearance to sell it.
Thank you very much. Sorry.
It allows the complex to go to rack and ruin.
We're going to have to just, I want to thank all the representatives for coming here today to assist the committee. Our plan originally was for a full 2.5-hour session with a number of other organisations, but that didn't happen. So to have it before recess, we felt it was important still to get yourselves and 30B in before recess. But what I would say is I think something on our work schedule, maybe in the autumn, that we might invite you back in and we get a full longer 2.5-hour session for further discussion, because I know it was a bit constrained. So my apologies about that. But no, I want to thank you very much for as I say, for coming here today. I wish Pat well. I know he's retired now of that role, but I know he's not retiring by any means. I know Fintan is a county man at my own back in Longford, has took over the role as president of IPOA, so wish him well in that role, and say, look, I thank everybody for coming, and we will further discuss the matter with representatives from the Residential Tenancy Board, and I propose that we suspend briefly to allow representatives from the RTB to take their seats. Thank you.
Thank you very much.